Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm Christine Van Gyn, and today I'm talking to journalist Robyn Doolittle about her investigative series about the gender pay gap in the legal profession. Robyn has been investigating pay gaps at major Canadian law firms, and what she has found has been shocking to a lot of people in the profession. The wage gap between male and female equity partners at top law firms averages $371,000 a year. That's 25% pay gap between men and women. Information about pay at large firms can be very secretive, with associates at these firms often in the dark about how they compare to their peers and what they may expect if they make it to the partner level. Robyn has been shining a light on this topic and where the trends may be heading. Robyn, thanks so much for joining today. I have to say you've been the talk of Bay Street with a lot of my friends who I went to law school with and articled with, so I'm really grateful you can be here today to talk to me about it. Can you tell me broadly, what did you find in your investigation and what surprised you the most?
Sure. Well, for the last year or so, we've been publishing an investigation at the Globe and Mail that's called The Power Gap. And it's been exploring gender imbalances in the modern workforce. And it's looked at a variety of sectors, including law. I think it's interesting to point out that the reason I became interested in the legal sector specifically is that while trying to look at the way that women were treated in various workplaces, I reached out to employment lawyers across the country, spoke with dozens of them, and I was astonished at how often the conversation ended with them saying, "Oh, and by the way, off the record, do you want to hear what happened to me at my law firm?" And it was just this incredible irony, I guess, that I was finding that the people who were hired to be kind of the knights, the warriors for these individuals who were facing discrimination in their own workplaces were telling me that they themselves were facing serious discrimination in their workplaces, and one of which was related to pay. And obviously, as you know, salaries in the legal sector are secret. There had been attempts by the Women Lawyers Forum, the Canadian Bar Association's WLF, to do a survey to get a sense of what the gap might be, similar to what happens in the United States. Firms refused. And over the course of the last year, I've now obtained, sometimes in one case voluntarily from Aaron and Bearless, but in two other cases, through other mechanisms, some internal confidential documentation of what the gap might be. And in both cases at the firms, it was Castles, Brock, and Blake's, the gap was 25% at the equity partner level.
Now, for our non-lawyer audience, can you explain how compensation is actually determined at these big firms? Because it varies.
Yeah, I mean, and I'd love to say I knew exactly, but the reality is one, firms were very secretive. My former colleague, Christine Dobby, did a lot of reporting on this for a story that ran in the series as well. It varies everywhere. Many firms don't even want to talk about it at all. Sometimes equity partners, so these are lawyers that have a stake, have invested in the firm and have a financial stake in it. Sometimes they don't even know what their colleagues are being paid. So it really varies. I mean, but definitely things that I've heard that are factored in are, the revenue that they generate. So the amount of billables that they're putting out, clients that they're bringing into the firm, how much work they're doing. And then also they're sometimes being credited for other things, such as mentorship or improving EDI in a firm. But it really seems to vary everywhere what types of things are being valued. And one thing I did hear, and I've certainly heard, maybe we're going to talk about some of the backlash that we've been hearing, but women told me over and over again that there's an eat what you kill idea, and that's understood. But sometimes even when you add up the kill counts, women are still not being paid at comparable levels to colleagues who are maybe producing lower revenue numbers or lower billables. So I think that that's something that was really intriguing to me as well.
The eat what you kill model, like for the non-lawyers, would be you keep a share of the revenue that you generate for the firm. So we've got to go to commercial break, but when we come back, I want to talk to you about some of the responses that the firms gave, because I think different firms had responded to the research. Lawyers have responded on Twitter. It's a big conversation. So I want to talk to you about some of those explanations for the pay gap and whether they make sense to you or not. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're talking about pay equity at law firms with journalist Robyn Doolittle. So Robyn has exposed a pretty significant pay gap between male and female equity partners, especially at the senior levels among firms. One of the things that I have heard from lawyers who respond to this is, shouldn't the people who make the most money for the firm be paid the most, right? Like, part of the compensation model is eat what you kill, where you keep part of the billables, or you're compensated by the clients that you manage and the size of them. So why shouldn't these lawyers who are making the most money for the firm be making the most money to take home?
I think there's two things here. One is, it makes perfect logical business sense that and certainly I heard this from firms, like the reality, if a lawyer is bringing in the most business for the firm and generating huge amounts of work for the rest of the firm, if you don't pay that lawyer their market rate, they will just go to another law firm, and then you lose all of that. Of course, that makes complete sense. You asked, and I've heard, should that person be making more? Sure, but you have to also consider, is that person making that much money because of a long history of advantages, I guess. I think that it is not a matter of debate anymore. I've certainly heard this discussed widely among law firms that, you go back 10, 15, 20 years, you had the majority of senior people in law firms, they were men. It is completely human nature to form bonds with people who share similar interests and who remind you of yourself, that that's just a natural thing. And because of that human impulse to make connections with people who are like you, referrals and mentoring and opportunities were often being passed to a certain specific type of person that happened to look a lot like the person that was there before. This is how a lot of those people built it doesn't mean they didn't work hard. It doesn't mean they didn't, bust their butts and make sacrifices to do it. But there were people who were also busting their butts and making sacrifices who weren't having those opportunities. So I don't know how you go back in time and re-legislate that, but that's a thing for now, the older, like that older question. Now, one thing that I think is really interesting, all the firms that I've looked at, and sorry, I'll stop talking in a second, but found that their newest hires had much less of a gap. So they do recognize that the old way of doing things was not the best way.
Yeah. So one of the things you found when you took out, I think it was partners who were beyond a certain year of call, who were, I forget what the number was. I think it was maybe 20 years out. You found that difference shrunk. And how big was the difference then when you removed these sort of old boys club lawyers from that equation?
So lawyers who were called to the bar who are equity partners in the last 20 years, the gap mostly goes away. 20 years is a little bit misleading because the equity partners were only, like the range of equity partners, we're talking about a 5-year group, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's not like you become an equity partner right out of law school. So 20 years is a little misleading. But yeah, the most recent people who have been made equity partner, the gap is almost gone, or in sometimes flipped to the women's advantage, where the woman is making slightly more money. I thought that was really interesting. One thing that was interesting to me, though, with Blake's in particular, I was able to take the entire data set, which was a very large number of people, and add the year of call, because I was really interested in seeing, like, can we actually see a difference between men and women based on their experience level? Can I look at, the men called in 1992 versus the women, and will that show me anything? And what I found was, for the most part, there's very little meaningful information that can be taken from it, because there were so few women. Like, that is the reality in the equity partner level. Like, you'd be comparing one or two salaries in a given year of call for women against 8 men. And so sometimes, a woman might, like, what was interesting to me actually at Blake's in particular, the 19 I believe it is the 1970s or 80s year of call, the women actually made more than the men on average. I ended up clumping them together into decades to have some sort of meaningful data, but it's because there was 3 or 4 women. They were outnumbered, I think, 5 to 1 or 4 to 1, and 1 or 2 salaries drove up the average to such an extent. So I think the big takeaway is that, for sure, people just coming into the partnership, they're on a more equal level footing right now. Women who have still been in the
Robyn, we've got to go to commercial break. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'll let you finish that one. We're coming back. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're talking about gender pay equity at law firms with journalist Robyn Doolittle. Robyn, you were just wrapping up your comments in the last segment.
Just to finish my point, what I thought was interesting is that there are still so many women who were called, in the 1980s, 1990s, the very early parts of 2000s, where the gap is actually 38%. So 25% overall, it's 38% for those women.
Wow.
And when you think of how much money that actually is, especially like compounded over time, I think it's a crisis, frankly.
So one of the things I want to talk about is the amount of money that we're talking about here. So the average equity partner on Bay Street makes $1.4 million, which I think will shock at the firms that you were looking at, which I think might shock a lot of our viewers. I mean, that's like an eye-popping amount of money. So, how much are we supposed to care as people that don't make that amount of money about a gender pay equity? If you're making over $1 million a year, how much are regular people supposed to care that you're making less than the men in that organization? Or on the flip side, does it actually show, even if a gender pay gap exists at the highest levels like this, that, what hope is there for the rest of us?
I heard this from women that I interviewed who said, part of what makes it difficult to challenge this is, how do you complain about making $1 million a year? And they know that the optics are not on their side. I guess one thing I will say is, again, I became interested in this because I was trying to go to the people who were defending people who were facing pay discrimination, right? And in their workplaces. Lawyers, know the laws inside out. Pay equity has been the law in this country for decades, right? It is incredibly significant to me that the people at the top of their profession, that at the height of power, are not being treated equitably. And I think, again, when you look at law, no law gets passed in this country, no major business deal gets signed without a lawyer's involvement. And when you think about what the sector is, I think it's incredibly relevant, these types of gaps. And again, it's not just pay either. It's about opportunities. It's certainly, we heard, and my colleague Christine Dobby reported on this, allegations of sexual harassment. Like, this is a profession that I think is held to a higher standard.
So when we're talking about pay equity among partners, is there a true apples to apples comparison? Because there's all kinds of things that might differentiate equity partners from one another, like a book of business size, and even the practice area, right? Like, there are some practice areas that are much more lucrative than others. And if you're just looking straight across at year of call and gender, those sort of nuances might not be there. How do you incorporate that into the assessment of whether this compensation is equitable or not?
I think whenever you talk about pay equity, it makes people uncomfortable. And I inevitably get lots of emails and tweets, mainly from men, I'll say, about this issue afterwards. You can take 2 people and you can justify why one is getting paid more. You can do it every time. Pull 2 people up over and over and over again. Yes, there's a million different reasons why that you can explain that and rationalize it. When you look at collectively, the huge amount of evidence that shows that women are not being paid the same as men, despite equal qualifications, despite the fact that women are graduating university at a higher rate, that women have been equal with men in law schools for decades. I think you're missing the point when you're having that argument. Now, there are many reasons why there is a gender wage gap, why there is a wage gap between white lawyers and racialized lawyers. And I think you cannot discount that the very obvious evidence that the bias that exists in all of us because of the society that we have grown up in is playing a role in that.
And I think a lot of people.
Sorry. It's not just simply a role of like, oh, you're a woman, I'm going to pay you less. It's so much more complex than that. And I get into that in the piece.
So one of the other things I want to talk about is where this is trending. We've only got about 30 seconds. You found, what did you find for the younger lawyers? You found that the equity gap had actually ceased, or in some cases reversed. Do firms care about this? Are they trying to do better? We've got about 30 seconds.
Yeah, so there was, among associates, there was still a gap around bonuses, around departments. This is not closing in a huge way. I mean, it's better. Are firms doing better? I don't know, to be honest. It doesn't, at my point when I'm looking at, of course there's progress, but I still see a lot of defensiveness on this topic.
We're going to be right back after this commercial break. Now, Robyn, I tried to get some other people to come on this show to talk about this topic, but it's a really difficult topic on Bay Street. And a lot of women who I went to law school with, who are friends with, a lot of people are afraid to talk about this topic. So what's your experience been talking to female lawyers about this issue?
You know, I totally understand the realities of why women can't speak out about this. It has been a little wild, I will say, reporting on this area. Just the complete cone of silence. You know, even just getting a woman to kind of pick up the phone or reply to an email, there is a real paranoia, I think, right now that firms just don't want to have anyone talking about this, which I think is a real bummer. And if there's some leadership of firms listening right now, the one thing I'll say is, guys, everyone knows there's a wage gap, right? Like, the bar right now is just acknowledge so that you can improve. If you don't set a benchmark, how do you know how you're getting better? Like, that's, I guess, one thing that is astonishing to me. But yes, it's been really challenging. It's like deep, source material that you have to get, even just some basic information. I mean, I would be curious to hear from you. I mean, you said off the top, and just now that you've heard your friends talking about this, like, what is the buzz? What are people saying about this series? Yeah. Are they surprised? Are they angry? Are they like, oh, well, it's not going to change? Like, I would love to know.
There's been a huge diversity of opinion on the people who I've talked to about it. And, I'm not going to name any names, but a lot of people already knew this. A lot of the women I talked to already feel this way, and some of them are really appreciative of your reporting. Others find it frustrating because I think they would like to explain away pay differences. A lot of them will say that these are explainable differences. I've had some people who I talked to about it who are angry at the reporting, and they wish you would focus on other industries because there are lots of industries with high compensation levels that are male dominated. So kind of this feeling of why law, and I think. Yeah, there's just been a huge diversity, but yes, definitely a cone of silence that people are really apprehensive about talking about it. And I also think a lot of the women I speak to feel that this is going away, that for their generation, for the younger generation of lawyers, that this isn't going to be as big a problem. I do hope that things are trending in a different direction. I do think firms are changing, and I mean, maybe that's naive of me, but what do you think?
I guess the only thing I'll say is it is, when you look at the grids and you see the people, it is totally true that the people at the absolute bottom, the men and women, are making equivalent amounts. But I don't think that's where inequities happen in institutions. They happen towards the top. I think the real test will be when those people start jockeying for leadership positions, when they do start climbing the ladder, does that trend hold? So I don't know. I think things are not going to change if people don't talk about it. And I think, when you talk about people who want to explain away the gaps, let's hear it. Let's hear the explanations, because there are good explanations. And I think that part of the problem with this discussion of pay equity is that it's so controversial. Like, I'm not trying to say that there are not lots of really rational reasons why there is a gap that are tied into so many different points of our society, right? But it's when you tease all of those things out, there is still a gap. Is it 25%? No, it's somewhere smaller than that, but I don't know where that is, because we can't actually look at it and discuss it like adults. And I think that the silence, while I understand it, is contributing to this, not just in the legal sector, but everywhere.
Well, I certainly hope that that things trend in a more equitable direction, and that women are presented with opportunities to show their skill and talent in the profession. Robyn, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We've heard today about a detailed investigation into the gender pay gap on Bay Street law firms. The gender pay gap exists in many professions, but the size of it on Bay Street, nearly $400,000, is truly shocking. While the general public may not have sympathy for Bay Street equity partners, who average about $1.4 million a year at the firms Robyn looked at, if the pay gap persists at the top levels, it may show how ingrained this problem is. The good news is that the trends, at least at the lower levels, appear to be shifting. But is that enough? You be the judge. I'm Christine Van Gyn, and remember, a freer Canada starts with you.